Mother's Day sermon, I took a little bit of a different track than I've done before, and I preached on something that I haven't preached on before ever, which is a little bit interesting because I'm a female and I'm in ministry. I've never talked about the challenges of women in ministry or some of the background of that and some of the things that keep women from being in ministry. And so I touched on that a little bit with the sermon, and then I spent a lot of time talking about really about a lot of the female heroes in the Bible that we don't get to hear about, because we've heard about the female heroes that are, culturally acceptable, and the ones that, maybe the best way to say it is that I have a hard time.
The popular girls.
No, not the popular girls, but the ones that are the ones that we can talk about that are meek and that are humble and that are self-sacrificing.
The traditional submissive roles.
The traditional submissive roles, which there's nothing wrong with that, and those are characteristics that should be emulated. Jesus was meek to the point where he was crucified on the cross. Those are things that we should, be valuing. But when it's the only thing that you're ever told that you can be, or that you're ever shown that you should be, that's when it becomes a problem. And Jesus was meek, but he was also brave. And self-sacrificing and all of those things. So when you're handpicked the stories that you're told as a child, sometimes it can give you a different perspective. And so I talked a little bit about that in the sermon. And I guess my approach, and this is kind of a strange way to start it out, but my approach years ago, when the last Wonder Woman, I don't know if it's the last one, but it's one of them, the one that Gal Gadot is in. Okay. When I watched that movie, I sat in the theater.
I've actually never seen that movie.
It was pretty good.
I've heard good things, but of all the superhero movies, I've just never seen.
Never seen it.
I don't watch much.
Kind of like nobody.
I'm kind of a Marvel guy.
Oh, okay. I was gonna make a joke about nobody watches female sports, so there's. But anyway.
No comment.
Yes. But when I watched that movie, and I said when I left the theater, I said I left the theater feeling like I wanted to open both doors and walk out of that theater. It just was empowering.
With your feet?
Yeah, pretty much.
Both feet.
Both feet. Yeah, that would have been.
Go smooth.
That would have been fun. That's like on Shrek when she does that thing, But no, I mean that would have been. I mean, that's how I felt. I felt empowered watching that movie, and I realized that I don't think as a female I've ever heard a sermon or anything from the pulpit that has made me feel like that has made me feel empowered and made me feel like I can go out there and make a difference. And so that was really my goal. I wanted to preach a sermon that gave us the heroes in the story that are like, you know what, I can do this. I can lead when I need to lead. I can be the person that God wants me to be. And I mean, like, when Deborah, I told the story about Deborah, and she was a serious leader. But we don't hear that much about her. We don't hear her preached as often as we might hear Jonah or, one of the other characters in the Bible. We just don't hear it that much. And so that's what I was trying to do with this sermon. So as males sitting in the audience, I was concerned a little bit that it would not impact the male audience. And I got a lot of feedback from the females in the audience that were like, I felt empowered. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for telling me that. I got calls and people wanted to go out for, like breakfast and talk about it. So I got a lot of that, but I knew, and I knew that it might not connect with the males in the audience, but I hoped that it would, because just like the story of Jonah or David or, Daniel and the lion's den, just like those stories are expected to connect with us girls when we're sitting in children's church The story of Deborah, the boys should be able to connect with that too. And if they can't connect with that, we have a problem. And so that's really kind of, so I'm curious, you guys were there listening. Did it help you to feel empowered? And if it didn't, that's fine. You don't have to lie to me, because we get one day, and on Father's Day, we'll ignore the women and we'll help you feel empowered somehow. I'm not sure if you guys need help in that area, but
Well, I mean, you started talking, and I was like, oh, well, she's clearly biased. That was my first thought. Yeah, I'm like, well, she gets a pass because it's Mother's Day.
It was a good nap.
In all
Stop it.
I was being harsh, but yikes. No, in all seriousness, it's a topic that has really become a very major issue with the big C church right now.
Yes.
I've seen over the past probably 2 years an intense amount of divisiveness over women's roles in ministry and women's roles in leadership between the denominations, where I've actually been seeing people get split and pulled out of denominations because they're getting information from Joe Schmo on YouTube, as we're recording this and posting it on YouTube. But
we're another Joe Schmo. It's okay.
We're the other Joe
Schmo.
We're the good one.
Yes, we're the good Joe Schmo.
But people need to make sure to actually do their exegesis and actually dig into what scriptures are being used to, push this ideology or this thought. One of the things that you brought up that I really enjoyed was actually the idea of, Garden of Eden. God saw, Adam, created him a helper. And just the word that is used for helper in the English context, it just doesn't do it justice. But then bringing it back and showing that Christ, that same word of helper was used, for God. It kind of changes our Western perspective on how that all shakes down.
That word is Ezer. And it's used in about 21 times, I think, in the Old Testament, and all but a couple of them we use to describe. I don't know if all but a couple of them, but the majority of them we use to describe actually God. God is my helper. And when we're saying that God is my helper, we don't have this bias that tells us that God is coming to help me in my plans and I'm primary.
He's so submissive.
Yes, he's so submissive. Yes. And so that's not the way we read it, but we choose, because of our culture, to read that word helper in Genesis, when God created Eve, as somehow she is secondary. She is the one that's helping the goals of Adam. But Adam and Eve were tasked equally with the care of creation. And when you look at what Jesus did, Jesus empowered women. He had female disciples, and he spoke to women, and he talked to women, and he broke down barriers of that.
He treated them like people.
Like people, imagine. But I mean, you joke about that, but women weren't treated like people. And that's one of the major things that Christianity does and Christianity offers, is that equalization. And so when we choose not to live with that level of equality, we're corrupting our witness. And a lot of people think that holding to traditional family values is what's going to make our witness sing. But when your traditional family values are based on your culture and your biases instead of what's actually in the Word, that's when you get into trouble. And I'm not saying that we can't have traditional family values, because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
That's a very vague term.
It's vague. I know I'm speaking in vague terms, but when they're defining traditional family values as women shouldn't work outside the home, that, those kinds of things, when they're defining it like that, that's not a reflection of God. That's a reflection of our culture and what our culture has taught us. And may we say, our culture in the church has taught us, because the church has adopted that outside culture, and that corrupts our witness. Because when God comes back, when we all go home, when we're in heaven, those barriers are broke down. So we started out equal. We're going to end equal. It's our witness to live as close to that as we possibly can right now. And when we don't do that, we're corrupting the witness.
So with that, how do you see, in an ideal sense, how do you see the change taking place in a practical application within the church, within the Big C church? I remember you mentioning the charge for the young women in the, I forget what the group was, being to just cultivate that relationship and to just be a better Christian, where the charge to the young men was to be leaders. How do we, in a more practical sense, start to introduce the idea that, well, maybe the women should lead, or, the men should find a relationship with Jesus, because that seems pretty important.
If you're going to lead, you would think that it's pretty important. So
It's almost like the two should go together.
Maybe. Yeah. And that's one of the things is I think that how we start correcting that is conversations like this. Is just raising awareness for it. So in the Assemblies of God, we structurally, there are no hindrances to women being in ministry. Women can preach from the pulpit, women can do missions, women can do any kind of ministry that God puts on their heart. But culturally, we've adopted that wider evangelical push that came out of really the 60s and the 70s, which was a backlash against some of the women's lib movement, feminist movement, and that wider cultural push. We've pulled that into our communities, our church communities, and it's just kind of spread out. So this church here, Bedrock Church, is what a lot of people call a Lydia church. It was started 75 years ago, and it was started by two women. And we have a lot of churches out there that are like that, but somehow in the 70s, 80s, 60s, maybe even going back farther, after Azusa Street, which was in the early 1900s, which actually launched the Assemblies of God movement, after that was started by a female and a black man, really. After that was started, all of a sudden, the minorities and the women lost their voice. And we just kind of accepted this. And so it's really just raising awareness that, hey, our roots aren't like this. This isn't where it started. And if we want to be effective, we can't jettison half of our leadership potential. We just can't. Why? Why would we do that? It doesn't make any sense.
Spoken like a true efficiency-minded leader.
Oh, I love efficiency.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yes. But okay, so if you look at girls' ministries versus boys' ministries, and this, I'm not trying to call out the denomination. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm just trying to raise awareness, because the girls won what we're here for right on front of the webpage is to see every girl moving toward a deep relationship with Jesus Christ and to realize her importance and potential in the kingdom of God. Excellent. Absolutely excellent. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you move over to the boys' ministry, it's building up boys to be lifelong servant leaders in their church, community, and mission field.
Also excellent.
Also excellent.
But why are they different?
Yes. And that's the question. And that's why we're asking the question, is just, why is this different? it shouldn't be different. We need the work. We need all of our leaders, and we need all of our leaders to develop a deep relationship with Christ. It's like we don't want some of them to have a deep relationship with Christ and believe they can't lead, and then others of them to think they can leave and not have a relationship with Christ. But that's taking it to extremes. I know that our girls.
There might be some of those.
Yeah, I know that our girls and boys
Blind dog
ministries
is your guide dog.
Yes. I know that our girls and boys ministries aren't doing that. I know that they're both solidly biblically based, but it reveals that leadership has not been a goal for our little girls. And that's the blind spot. And that's where we have a lot of girls sitting in our children's ministries where when we look at them, our goals for them might be to raise strong Christian women. But our goals for the boys, when we look at the boys, is to raise strong Christian leaders.
So what?
Go ahead.
So what? With that in mind, you were raised in the church all your life. You were raised under the women should get a deeper relationship with Christ. What pushed you to want to become that leader? What in your personal history?
Inefficiency.
Yeah, that plays into it. I was raised. I was never told that I couldn't do things, but I was also never told that I necessarily could do things, and so I never even thought to preach. It was never even a thought for me. And I think back now, if I would have started this career back in my 20s or 30s, I wonder what I could have done. But it just never even occurred to me. It's okay, Legos, okay? Legos.
Those are Legos?
Yes. So a free shout out for Legos, I guess, today. As we're here with our friend Giraffe Lego. Yeah, he's thirsty. So I loved Legos as a kid. I loved Legos. I didn't have Legos because I was a girl and those are boys' toys. But I could not wait to go visit a household that had little boys because I knew they'd have Legos. And I'd be able to build things with them. And I loved that. It literally never occurred to me to ask for Legos. Never occurred to me. And that's the challenge that we run into, is that when it's not a priority for the people who are leading you to help you see what can be. I mean, it's why we want to expose our kids to as many things as possible so that they get it. It's why we want our scientists to visit our elementary schools so that the kids can get a sense that, hey, I can do that too. So if we don't treat our girls and our girls' ministries like this, we're robbing the church because they don't even think to ask. And when I went to seminary at Fuller, and then when I came into the Assemblies of God to be ordained, I had to take a couple of classes because Fuller didn't teach, like AG, history, mission, and governance. Imagine that.
Nor should it.
Yeah.
Everybody should.
Oh, yeah. So I had to
put
take
that right in my architecture degree.
Yes, yeah, that should have that there too. So when I was sitting there, though, and I'm sitting in a room, really at this point, we're ordaining as many women as men, if not more women than men. Not ordaining, but certifying or licensing. There's a few different levels. Ordination is we're not seeing that shift there quite yet. But
there were a lot in the certified and licensed level.
Yes, when at the last ceremony. But so I'm sitting in a room full of people, and good half of them are females. But if you go around the room, every single one of them, because we went around the room to just say hi, who we are, in our ministry context. Every single one of them had vision for kids ministry or women's ministry. And when you see that, played out in front of you. That's not just chance. That's not like all of the men there were moving into pastoral ministry in other ways. They weren't just kids ministry or men's ministries. There was nobody there for men's ministries.
There are no men's ministries.
Yeah, that's the pastor's responsibility in the standard church.
Yeah, and so I mean, there are some men's ministries, but that's a whole different topic. But there's and so is women's ministries. But you got
I like the pastors' wives' ministries personally.
Yes.
will
My
be
husband
here
keeps
all
getting
night.
my husband keeps getting invites for those. It's kind of fun. But
I haven't gotten any invites yet. I'm kind of sad.
oh, okay, you're missing
You two
out.
can
then.
go together.
Yes. Yeah.
That would shake things up.
Yes, it would. It would shake things up. But when you go around and you look at that, and you look at those numbers, you're like, you gotta realize there's something else at work here. We're missing something, and that's really what in the church. Why I chose to preach this sermon on this day, and I will probably never preach on women in ministry again, because I normally don't, because that's not what I want to talk about. But at some point we have to say, hey, listen, this is something that we've come out of. This is something we're trying to come out of, and we've got a lot of work to do. Sometimes you have to address the elephant in the room and in order to move forward. I mean, we don't want to think about it, but there is a ton of church hurt for women. Women who've been told that they can't do what they've wanted to do. There's so much of it. And I know there's church hurt for men too, but I know.
But we talk about that on Father's Day.
We'll talk about that on Father's Day. Maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. But we've got to, for some people, we have to address some of those things, those things that were just implied, that you're supposed to grow up and you're supposed to want these things, and the rest of this stuff. If you want that stuff, maybe it's because there's something wrong, or maybe you're one of the special women that God really put a call on. But that's not the truth. God has called us all to leadership. If you're a Christian, you're a leader. And I don't think it's up to people to tell you what that should look like.
So, like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of divisiveness that's created, with this topic. Just looking at different scriptures, a lot of people reference Timothy, saying, that men should, be the pastors, be in charge. How do you address that with people?
So and I didn't address that in my sermon. And I chose not to do it because I'm not looking for a debate. So there have been, and I did hear back that one person had wished that I had addressed those. Although there are so many books written by that. There are so many written about that. There's so many scholars that have done that work already. There's so much good information out there. You gotta want to find it, because if you just Google women in ministry, you're going to get the most popular talking heads that tell you all of the things that are the reasons why women shouldn't be in ministry. You've got to look into some of the academic stuff. You've got to look into some of the stuff that digs deep into the scriptures. But a lot of that is cultural, and there's very good explanations for all of that. I could take hours now and probably unpack all of that, but I'm redoing what's already been done.
Do you have any specific recommendations of academics who have done the work already for people to look at?
Yes, but I'm terrible at remembering names and titles of books. Maybe we'll put some of those
irony.
up. Yeah. Maybe we'll put some of those.
Bible.
Yeah.
Various artists.
Yes. Yes. No, maybe we'll put some of those up in the comments. Some of the books that I've read, and that I've appreciated, and so because there's just a ton of stuff out there. Frankly, and this is what I said at the beginning of the sermon, I'll just kind of reiterate it, is once you get to the point where you're standing at a pulpit as a female, not a lot of us talk about it, because once you get to that point, you have made the decision to just speak the words that God's put on your heart. And that's your responsibility. My responsibility is not to change somebody's mind from their biases. I can give them the information, and like in little ways in the sermon, of course we do that, but we work on that. But it's my job to speak what God puts on my heart. And if somebody who's sitting in the pews doesn't want to listen, that's between them and God. Like, I'm not going to get into that fight. There's enough out there. If you wanted to educate yourself, you can do it. But if you'd rather sit there and dismiss half of the power of the church, yeah, you take that one up with God. I'm not into arguing about it.
Ultimately, nothing that anybody says is going to make any difference without, the convicting power of the Holy Spirit in the end.
Exactly.